Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Brookside Police Station was eerily silent that night. The pale fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow, revealing every speck of dust floating in the air. The wall clock ticked away the minutes like a cruel reminder that nothing can stop time, not even human error. Officer Daniel Harper entered the main room with arrogant confidence. For years, he had cultivated a sense of superiority tinged with racial prejudice. For him, the law was merely a tool to maintain his control, and anyone he deemed inferior had to be put in their place. Tonight, he wanted to teach a lesson to someone who, in his opinion, didn't deserve respect. Seated opposite him was Judge Marcus Sullivan, who had recently come to the station on administrative matters. Judge Sullivan, a respected and upright man, was known for his calm demeanor, self-control, and impeccable reputation. Harper knew nothing of his true identity. All he saw was an opportunity to assert himself and ridicule the man he believed to be vulnerable. In an impulsive and shocking gesture, Harper grabbed the clippers lying on a desk and approached the judge. The first metallic clangs echoed through the empty room. Harper began shaving the judge's head, thinking of it as an act of pure domination. The strands fell to the tiled floor, creating a macabre contrast with the entrance rug. The judge, initially startled, remained motionless, silently analyzing the man before him, assessing his intentions and his stupidity. At that moment, Harper was blinded by his own arrogance. He was completely unaware that the surveillance cameras were capturing his every move and that his already fragile reputation would be destroyed in an instant. He also didn't know that Marcus Sullivan possessed such moral and legal authority that even the most arrogant police officer could not escape unscathed. When Harper stepped back, satisfied with his work, a heavy silence fell. The judge straightened slowly, his gaze icy but controlled. In that simple movement, Harper felt a shiver of fear for the first time. He had just crossed an invisible line, the one where power turns against those who wield it unjustly. That night, Brookside Police Station would never be the same. Harper had just sown the seeds of his own downfall, and every decision he made from then on would be scrutinized. Revenge was inevitable, but it would come in a form he could never have imagined. The next morning, Brookside Police Station buzzed like a bustling beehive. Officers discussed the night's incidents, urgent calls, and backlogged cases. Harper, however, strode down the halls with inflated confidence, pleased with what he considered a warning issued to a mere judge. He didn't yet know that his actions would be captured on surveillance cameras and that the images would quickly circulate to the highest levels of the judicial hierarchy. For Harper, everyone was a pawn, and he already saw himself as the master of the game. Meanwhile, Judge Marcus Sullivan, impeccably dressed despite his uneven haircut, entered the station to finalize a routine case. He had observed Harper from a distance, analyzing every move of the arrogant officer. His composure wasn't fear, but a strategy, to let the man reveal himself. Harper, seeing him, allowed himself a condescending smile. "Ah, there you are," he said, trying to downplay the obviousness of his actions the day before. "You understand that the law works differently here, don't you?" The judge did not reply immediately. He sat down, placed his files on the desk, and looked Harper straight in the eye. "Officer Harper," he began in a firm but measured voice, "I believe you misjudged your role and your limits last night." Harper shrugged, convinced he could intimidate the judge with his posture and arrogance. "Judge, you should know that I enforce the law here. And sometimes, you have to be firm with those who don't respect it." But before he could finish, a buzzer sounded. The reception area security camera had transmitted the footage of the incident to the lead detective, Captain Olivia Reed, a rigorous and principled woman. She entered the room, her eyes burning with indignation. "Harper," she thundered. "Do you realize what you've done?" Harper felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time, the self-assurance he had displayed for years wavered. Judge Sullivan, unperturbed, stood and calmly placed his hand on Harper's shoulder. "You have just crossed a line you can no longer ignore." At that precise moment, Harper understood that his downfall had just begun. And it was going to be faster and more public than he could ever have imagined. News of the incident spread like wildfire through Brookside Police Station. Harper's colleagues whispered in the hallways, some amused, others horrified. Even the most senior officers knew that this kind of behavior, especially toward a respected judge like Marcus Sullivan, would not go unpunished. Harper, still shaken, tried to downplay the incident. He kept telling himself it was just an insignificant gesture, a simple reminder of authority. But the video evidence, impossible to ignore, spoke for itself. Every strand of hair that fell to the floor testified to his arrogance and disregard for the rules. Meanwhile, Judge Sullivan was taking matters into his own hands, but subtly. He knew that a direct confrontation wouldn't be enough. His approach was strategic: let Harper sink on his own, demonstrate his own integrity, and then enforce justice relentlessly. Captain Olivia Reed summoned Harper to her office. The room was simple, austere, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. "Daniel," she began, her gaze steady, "the images we saw are unacceptable. You have humiliated a judge. Do you understand the gravity of that?" Harper, trying to hide his fear, attempted a smile. "Captain, that was a frustrating moment. I didn't think it would go this far." Olivia shook her head, clearly irritated. "This isn't a matter of opinion. It's a matter of respecting the law and your role. Your actions have already drawn the attention of the mayor's office and the Department of Justice. You will likely be suspended pending an investigation." Harper felt his heart race. The suspension, the loss of reputation, the public humiliation. It was all happening faster than he could have imagined. He realized, too late, that his pride and arrogance had just betrayed him. Meanwhile, Sullivan was preparing for an official statement. He knew that every word, every gesture, could transform an act of humiliation into a public lesson. He didn't need anger; his composure, his calm, and his reputation would be enough to turn the situation around. Harper returned home that evening, nervous and worried. He knew his career could be jeopardized, and he was beginning to grasp the full extent of the consequences of his rash action. But he didn't yet know that this was only the beginning. The following morning, Brookside Police Station resembled a silent battlefield. Harper felt the weight of everyone's stares. Even his colleagues, used to his arrogance, looked at him differently, some with disdain, others with suspicion. Whispers in the hallways were already telling the story before management had even made an official decision. Harper sat at his desk, unable to concentrate on his files. Every notification on his phone filled him with dread: anonymous messages, silent calls from superiors, emails from the mayor's office. His actions the day before had turned into a ticking time bomb. Meanwhile, Judge Marcus Sullivan had begun communicating with the police department through official channels. But he wasn't seeking personal revenge. He simply wanted law and order restored. He was writing a precise report, detailing the incident, making sure that every word reflected his calm, composure, and moral authority. At the station, Harper was summoned once again by Captain Olivia Reed. The tension in the room was palpable. "Daniel," she said firmly, "the evidence has been forwarded to the mayor's office and the Department of Justice. Your suspension is immediate. You will remain on foot until further notice." Harper felt his ego crumble. For the first time, he realized that his reputation wasn't just tarnished, it was destroyed. "Captain, I can explain." He stammered, but Olivia interrupted him. "Your explanations change nothing. You have humiliated a law enforcement officer and compromised the reputation of this station. You will have to face the consequences." The incident didn't remain secret for long in the town. Local media broadcast blurry images of Harper shaving the judge, sparking anger and outrage. Citizens, shocked by the officer's arrogance, began to question the professionalism of the Brookside police. Harper then realized that the situation had spiraled out of control. What he had thought was an isolated incident, a show of force, had become a public scandal. Pressure was mounting from all sides: his superiors, his colleagues, the mayor's office, the community, and above all, Judge Sullivan, calm and methodical, was watching every move, ready to turn this humiliation into a lasting lesson. That day marked the beginning of Harper's inevitable downfall. He was not yet aware that what followed would be far more humiliating and relentless than anything he had imagined. Officer Daniel Harper's suspension wasn't just a professional setback, it began to take a heavy toll on his personal life. His colleagues now avoided his gaze, his fellow officers were torn between embarrassment and disbelief, and every outing in the city seemed to elicit whispers and silent judgments. Harper, once confident and commanding, found himself isolated. At home, his phone buzzed incessantly. Anonymous calls, messages of public outrage, and emails from the Department of Justice confronted him with the gravity of his actions. Each notification was a stark reminder of his stupidity and arrogance. Even his family began to question his choices, no longer recognizing the confident man they once knew. Meanwhile, Judge Marcus Sullivan pursued his strategy with methodical precision. He was not seeking personal revenge, but rather the application of justice and the demonstration that no one is above the law. He sent official letters to the mayor's office and the police department, demanding a full investigation into Harper's conduct, all while maintaining a calm and impartial tone. At the station, the chain of command took action. Harper was temporarily isolated from all important assignments and placed under strict surveillance. Captain Olivia Reed summoned him for a meeting, this time to discuss not only the suspension but also his reinstatement. "Daniel," she said, her eyes fixed on him, "if you want to get your position back, you must understand that respect and integrity are non-negotiable." Harper nodded, but inside, a mixture of anger and humiliation gnawed at him. He felt that every step he took from now on would be watched, judged, and potentially criticized. He understood that Judge Sullivan was not just an obstacle, he was a master at turning humiliation into a public lesson. Tensions rose further when the local press began to take an interest in the case. Articles, reports, and even discussions on social media all touched on the previous day's incident. The entire community wondered how an officer could dare to humiliate a judge in his own station. Harper, who thought he could control everything, began to realize that he had become the center of a scandal that would completely overwhelm him. That day marked a painful realization for Harper. His arrogance had not only jeopardized his professional life, but had also tarnished his personal and social reputation. He had yet to see what Judge Sullivan and the justice system had in store for him. A few days after the incident, Daniel Harper realized that his suspension was only the beginning of his troubles. Every move he made was scrutinized, every word analyzed. Even his closest colleagues now avoided him, whispering comments among themselves that Harper perceived as silent barbs. In the town of Brookside, residents began to speak openly about the incident. Social media circulated the blurry but striking images of Judge Marcus Sullivan having his head shaved by Harper. The community expressed outrage and dismay, turning the incident into a national issue. Harper understood for the first time that his arrogance had spilled beyond the confines of the station and that he was now subject to public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Justice Sullivan patiently and meticulously pursued his strategy. He drafted an official report detailing the incident, highlighting Harper's breach of protocol and blatant incompetence. He ensured that every word reflected his composure and moral authority, thereby reinforcing his credibility. Captain Olivia Reed summoned Harper for a disciplinary meeting. "Daniel," she began, "your actions have consequences far beyond this station. The mayor's office and the Department of Justice are demanding strict measures. You could face dismissal if no improvement is seen." Harper felt his ego crack. For the first time, he realized that his impulsive act had triggered an uncontrollable chain reaction. Even his personal life was no longer spared, friends were distancing themselves, his family was expressing their concern, and every outing in the city reminded him of his humiliation. Judge Sullivan, for his part, showed no resentment. His strategy was subtle, to transform Harper's arrogance and stupidity into a public example of justice in action. Every decision, every report, every communication with the department strengthened his position and paved the way for the inevitable consequences. Harper began to understand that his fall would be long and painful. What he thought was a simple act of power had turned into an implacable downward spiral: professional humiliation, media pressure, public judgment, and a direct confrontation with a judge who was perfectly in control of the situation. The storm was only just beginning, and Harper, for the first time, felt the weight of his own arrogance and prejudices. A few weeks after the incident, Daniel Harper's case reached a new level. The Department of Justice decided to hold a public hearing to examine Harper's conduct at Brookside Station. The event attracted not only local media but also citizens who wanted to see justice done. Harper arrived, still confident but nervous. He thought he could downplay the incident, or apologize in a way that would limit the damage. But he was immediately confronted with the power of Judge Marcus Sullivan's strategy. The judge, calm and impeccably dressed, spoke with natural authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sullivan began, "what you are about to see today is not just an act of individual arrogance. It is a reminder that no one is above the law, not even a police officer." The surveillance camera footage was shown. Harper saw herself shaving the judge's head, a thoughtless and humiliating gesture that sent a chill through the courtroom. Murmurs turned to exclamations, and Harper's face tightened under the weight of public judgment. Captain Olivia Reed then spoke, detailing the disciplinary measures already underway: immediate suspension, a thorough investigation, and the possibility of permanent dismissal. Harper felt his heart sink. His once intact ego was now crushed under the merciless gaze of the community and the judicial authorities. But Judge Sullivan didn't stop there. With cool, strategic control, he laid out the moral and social impact of Harper's actions, emphasizing how an act of arrogance could erode public trust in the police. Every word seemed to weigh heavily on Harper, who lowered his eyes, unable to formulate a credible defense. The entire room watched. The media filmed, the public followed, and Harper understood, for the first time, that his impulsive action was not simply an error in judgment but a public humiliation that would be etched in memories for a long time. Leaving the courtroom, Harper felt crushed, diminished. Judge Sullivan, on the other hand, had achieved his goal: to transform Harper's arrogance and stupidity into an example of justice and morality. Harper had just crossed a line he could never erase, and every future action would now be controlled by the consequences of this single mistake. After the public hearing, Daniel Harper felt a deep and persistent fear for the first time. The public shame, the isolation within the station, and the accusing stares of his colleagues had changed him. But Harper, ever determined, decided to try to salvage what he could of his career and reputation. He began by writing formal letters of apology to Judge Marcus Sullivan, the mayor's office, and the police department. Every word was carefully chosen, but his misplaced pride made some sentences awkward. Harper hoped that these apologies, combined with his promises of rehabilitation, might lessen the public disgrace. However, Sullivan left nothing to chance. Aware that Harper was seeking public redemption, the judge decided to evaluate her not on words, but on real and measurable actions. He demanded a formal meeting with Harper, in the presence of Captain Olivia Reed, to assess her sincerity and her ability to understand the impact of her actions. During this meeting, Harper tried to project a humble image. "Judge Sullivan, I deeply regret what I did. I understand that I crossed the line and I am prepared to take all necessary steps to rectify my mistakes." Sullivan listened calmly, his gaze scrutinizing every gesture, every nuance of his voice. "Harper," he replied calmly, "apologies are just words. What matters are your future actions. Trust is earned through deeds, not words." Captain Reed added, "We're going to give you a chance, but every step will be evaluated. Your behavior, your attitude towards colleagues and the community, everything will be observed. There will be no leniency." Harper understood that this chance was fragile, that every move would be scrutinized, and that Judge Sullivan would let nothing slide. His attempt at redemption was not simply a personal gesture, it was a public test, an ordeal imposed by justice and morality. For the first time, Harper realized that his career, his reputation, and his dignity now depended entirely on his ability to reform himself. And he began to understand that every past act of arrogance could turn against him at any moment, intensifying the tension and the weight of his mistakes. After his attempt at redemption, Daniel Harper thought he could return to some semblance of normalcy. But Judge Marcus Sullivan and Captain Olivia Reed had other plans. Harper's rehabilitation would be tested not only by words or promises, but by concrete and difficult actions. Harper was assigned humiliating and strictly supervised tasks. He was now required to accompany young recruits on patrol missions, participate in community programs, and attend workshops on respect and equality. Every step was observed by his superiors and meticulously reported. During a patrol in a troubled neighborhood, Harper encountered a delicate situation. A minor incident involving local teenagers forced Harper to act with patience and respect, whereas his impulsive instincts would have led him to resort to brute force. He felt Judge Sullivan's gaze symbolically weighing upon him, as if every action had to be evaluated and judged. Back at the station, Harper also had to write detailed reports on his interactions and decisions and submit them for evaluation. Captain Reed, relentless, reread every word, corrected every mistake, and underlined any remaining inappropriate behavior. Each correction was a stinging blow to Harper, who gradually came to understand that his career could only be restored through a complete transformation. The press continued to closely monitor his actions, and Harper was aware that his every move could be reported, analyzed, and judged by the public. The tension became unbearable. It was no longer simply a professional sanction, but a public moral lesson, meticulously orchestrated by Judge Sullivan. Little by little, Harper began to realize that true power lay not in intimidation or arrogance, but in respect, patience, and self-control. Every task, every observation, every criticism was a mirror reflecting her weaknesses and past mistakes. For Harper, the experience was painful, but necessary. And he finally began to understand that his forced humility might be the only way to rebuild what he had destroyed. However, the road ahead was still long, and Judge Sullivan held all his cards, ready to test Harper to the very end. A few weeks later, the Daniel Harper case reached its climax. The Brookside Police Department, under the watchful eye of Captain Olivia Reed and with the approval of Judge Marcus Sullivan, organized a public meeting to address Harper's professional conduct in front of the community. The event aimed to demonstrate that law and ethics always prevail over arrogance and contempt. Harper entered the room, aware that the entire city was watching. The tension was palpable. News cameras were present, recording every move. Citizens, from neighbors to influential members of the community, waited to see how an officer who had humiliated a judge would face justice. Judge Sullivan spoke, calm and imposing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what you are about to see today is not simply an isolated incident. It is a lesson in responsibility, respect, and justice." The images of Harper shaving the judge's head were shown again, this time accompanied by expert testimony and analysis of the breach of professional ethics and the law. Harper felt his face flush with public shame. Every whisper, every accusing glance, every camera pointed at him amplified his humiliation. Captain Reed then detailed the disciplinary measures and rehabilitation efforts to which Harper had been subjected. "You were evaluated on your actions, your reports, and your conduct toward the community," she explained. "But shortcomings remain. Your choices of yesterday continue to affect the confidence we place in this position." Harper tried to defend his efforts, but every attempt at justification was contradicted by the evidence, the reports, and the judge's testimony. Sullivan's calm and precise demeanor rendered any defense ineffective. Harper realized with horror that he was no longer being judged solely by his superiors, but by the entire community and the judicial system. At that precise moment, Harper understood the magnitude of his downfall. What he had taken for an act of domination and superiority had become a public example of the inadmissibility of arrogance and contempt. His career, his image, and his ego were severely damaged, and he understood that the road to redemption would be long, painful, and demanding. Judge Sullivan, for his part, had achieved his goal, to transform Harper's humiliation into a lesson in public justice, demonstrating that law and ethics always prevail over individual arrogance. Harper left the courtroom crushed and introspective, aware that his fall was total, and that redemption, if it existed, would only come with genuine inner change. A few months after the incident, Daniel Harper was a changed man. Not through pride, but through forced humility. The suspension, the public humiliations, and the ordeals imposed by Captain Olivia Reed and Judge Marcus Sullivan had left an indelible mark on him. One morning, Harper was summoned to the station for a final official evaluation. This time, there were no press cameras, no crowd, but the weight of justice was palpable. Judge Sullivan and Captain Reed were waiting for him, their gazes calm but unwavering. Sullivan spoke first. "Daniel, what you did was inexcusable. But mistakes, when faced honestly, can become lessons. We have observed your efforts over the past few months." Harper, nervous, nodded. "Yes, Judge Sullivan. I understand. I finally understand what it means to respect the law and others." The judge nodded, but his voice remained firm. "Apologies and redemption come through actions, not just words. You have been tested not only to make amends for your mistakes, but to understand their gravity." Captain Reed added, "Your suspension is lifted, but you are on strict probation. Your future conduct will be monitored. This is your chance to prove that you have truly changed." Harper felt a mixture of relief and fear. He had survived the final test, but he knew his past arrogance would never completely disappear. He now had to rebuild his reputation, honor his commitments, and prove himself worthy of his uniform. As he left the room, Harper cast one last glance at Judge Sullivan. The judge remained motionless, calm, his gaze grave but fair. In that silence, Harper understood that true revenge lay not in public humiliation, but in the moral lesson he had just received: blind arrogance can destroy, but justice and respect can rebuild and transform. That day marked the end of Harper's downfall, but the beginning of his profound learning. He had been confronted with his own vanity, humiliated in front of his peers and the community, and now he understood that every choice, every action, had to be guided by integrity and justice. And for Judge Marcus Sullivan, the lesson had been masterfully delivered: moral authority and patience can overturn the most stubborn arrogance, without ever lowering one's own level of dignity.